In 2012, a long-lost, unfinished painting by artist Edward Burne-Jones was rediscovered. He was working on it in around 1871. Burne-Jones also had sketchbooks where he used to place ideas that he had. In one of those books, there's a sketch which very closely resembles this painting. And on the facing page of that sketch are three names: Tristram, Isolde, and Palomides. The story of Tristram, or Tristan, and Isolde is a 12th century romance that has been told in numerous variations since then. But the general gist of it is this. A boy named Tristan travels to Ireland to bring back La Belle Isolde for his king uncle to marry. Along the journey, they take a love potion which causes them to fall madly in love with each other. La Belle Isolde still marries the king, but she and Tristan continue to seek one another as lovers. The king eventually learns about this and banishes Tristan, never to return again. Tristan then meets and marries a woman also named Isolde, primarily because she has the same name as the woman he loves. In Burne-Jones's painting, you see Tristan embracing the Isolde he married, while La Belle Isolde is to the left, clutching a note to be delivered to her true love, Tristan. To the right of the painting is believed to be Palomides, the third name written in the sketchbook. Palomides is La Belle Isolde's unrequited lover. In this 900-year-old medieval story, you have three variations of what is going to be the topic of this video: the love triangle. It is believed that Burne-Jones's painting is a reflection of his inner feelings during that time, as this was right after he was in a passionate love affair with artist and model Maria Zambaco. When his wife found out about the affair, Maria tried to convince Burne-Jones to join her in death by overdosing on opium by the canal in Little Venice. This pact was unsuccessful and he called off the affair to save his marriage. At the time, this was a big scandal and the talk of London. So here you have an artist using a fictional medieval story to express his very real and intense life experience. Things are not always as simple as finding someone you love, that person loving you back, and the two of you go on to live happily ever after. A lot of the time, there's someone else involved, someone who you'd rather not be in the picture. And because this is a common life experience, it is also common in art, music, books, film, and television. But just because love triangles are a relatable dynamic does not mean it's something people are interested in seeing or reading about all the time. I feel like over the past decade or so, any hint of this trope is met with groans or eye rolls, and this might be the most divisive storytelling trope there is. So why is that? Why is something that is filled with drama and relatability also so annoying for some people to have to sit through? Part 2. Young Adult. Speaking as someone that has read and continues to read a lot of young adult novels, as well as watch their movie adaptations, I'm not using this as an opportunity to trash the genre. That being said, I do think a particular era of these books played a significant role in giving the love triangle a bad rap. That is because the way it was used in these stories encapsulates most of the problems I and many people have with the trope. It all starts in the mid to late 2000s with a little franchise called Twilight.
You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?!
No matter what you think of the series, Twilight is an interesting case study for this because it is simultaneously one of the most effective love triangles ever written in terms of getting the target audience invested in the story, while also being one of the most despised uses of it, to the point where I think it's probably done the most damage to people's perception of this trope. Before we get into dunking on Twilight, I'll be positive and say that a lot of the visceral hatred for it was definitely over the top. If you know you're not a part of the target audience, there's no need to dedicate so much energy to letting everyone know how much of an abomination you think the story is. Not that criticizing Twilight is off limits.
What?
You're asking me about the weather?
But at some point, you just have to accept that teenage girls are allowed to have a gothic romance story of sparkly vampires and buff Native American werewolves. It's not that serious. And I'd be lying if I said I hadn't hate-watched these movies an unspecified number of times. But when it comes to the love triangle, that infamous love triangle of Bella, Edward, and Jacob, I do think the harsh critique is deserved, for a couple reasons. The main one being there's something a little inauthentic about it, and I think Twilight really kicked off an artificiality to how the love triangle is used in stories. I'll put quarter of the blame for this on Stephenie Meyer and the rest on the movie studio Summit Entertainment. First with the author. The execution of the love triangle in the books is not very good. It's included in the story for there to be some added conflict, but when the love triangle is so one-sided and when the end result is so obvious, it's not conflict, it's just tedious and forced. The only part where Jacob has even a semblance of a chance of being with Bella is in the second installment, New Moon. To refresh your memory, this is the classic where Edward abruptly leaves Bella, which traumatizes her, makes her clinically depressed, and she sits in a chair for 4 months straight. She then spends half her time either hanging out with Jacob, who now has a haircut and abs and is also a werewolf, and the other half putting herself in life-threatening situations so that Ghost Edward can visit her and say, no, don't do that. Even if Jacob does help fill a bit of the void Edward left, it is so clear through her extreme reaction to him leaving and the extreme lengths she'll go through to bring him back, that she's not just in love with Edward, she's obsessed. More obsessed than anyone can possibly be with another human being. Or vampire, sorry. So it comes as no surprise that she gets back together with him at the end, which means that any intrigue of this love triangle that was properly introduced as being a possibility in book 2 is also put to bed by the end of book 2.
Marry me, Bella.
Yet, it still somehow remains a major plot point of the entire series, so everything that comes after New Moon is just dragging it along for no reason.
We're done here. No, you're done here.
Stop! I'm tired of this.
What would have been a far better alternative in my opinion is if this quote-unquote trauma that Edward inflicted on her by leaving all of a sudden actually got her to resent him a little bit, and if Jacob showing up for her during such a dark period got her to genuinely fall for him, so that by the end of New Moon she chooses him. This would first of all be great for Bella as a character to show that she has agency and that her entire being isn't obsessively tied into one person. It would also be great for Jacob as a character because he would have far less of a pathetic, nice guy storyline that follows. But lastly, it is great for the love triangle because by the time Eclipse rolls around, you would have genuine conflict. It would no longer be the heavily one-sided dynamic with Jacob on the sidelines saying, "You marrying him? Why not me? Pick me, pick me, pick me." You can actually explore the love triangle for real, and when Edward inevitably wins her over because they're soulmates and she's supposed to turn into a vampire by the end of the series, you can also have Jacob move on in a respectful way because the closure he gets would have been the relationship he had with her that didn't work out, instead of the god-awful closure of him imprinting on her infant daughter.
Look. It's a wolf thing.
However, I still only give Stephenie Meyer a small part of the blame, because while yes, the way this was written was annoying, I'm not going to go as far as to say that because she didn't write it the way I would have preferred, she ruined love triangles forever. No. The bigger culprit, in my mind, is Summit Entertainment. Like I said earlier, this was one of the most effective love triangles ever written, where having the target audience invested in the story. Summit knew this and they capitalized on it as much as they possibly could. The amount of free advertising they got from thousands of teenage girls and even grown adults yelling Team Jacob or Team Edward, or wearing Team Jacob or Team Edward merchandise probably amounted to, I'd guess, $1 gazillion. And this would be fine had they not then made sure to leech it for everything it's worth in the movies as well, where they took the crumbs of a love triangle in Eclipse and amplified it to the millionth degree. It just makes what was already annoying so much more so, but it was undoubtedly successful for them. So when it was time for the Hunger Games adaptations by Lionsgate, which owns Summit Entertainment, they did the same thing. If you've read the books, you know there really isn't much of a love triangle there to begin with, and Suzanne Collins never forced it. Katniss's priority is first with her sister and second ending the war. She's even a little annoyed at the idea of having to choose between these two boys. Yet, with the movies and the promo for them, they made a huge push to try and get Team Peter and Team Gale going. Thankfully, the adaptations, especially Catching Fire, were really good, faithful adaptations regardless. Still, this is the point where people start to really get sick of the trope because it snowballed into this lazy gimmick that starts popping up in all stories. It stops being about the relatability and angst of conflicted or unrequited love and instead is cheapened into a device thrown into any young adult novel or movie as filler between the main plot and as a way to get people to shout buzzwords like team this or team that. The love triangle became far too repetitive and oversaturated. People start hating tropes when it makes stories predictable. When you watch a new movie and feel like you've already watched it. When you read a new book and feel like you've already read it. And that's how I felt about the love triangle too, until 2018 when a new favorite of mine came out called The Favourite. This is my favorite love triangle of all time. It is so flawlessly written and I want to illustrate that by talking about structure. First of all, there are no rules to how a love triangle should be structured. A lot of the fun of it is that there is so many variations and options to choose from, but the problem is, people don't tend to play around with these options and end up going for the safest, most familiar ones we've seen a million times already, while ignoring more interesting decisions you can make, which makes for a more enjoyable viewing experience. And The Favourite makes all the right choices. The Favourite is a movie set in the 18th century about an impoverished girl named Abigail who finds employment in the palace of Queen Anne, first as a scullery maid and then as Lady of the Bedchamber. Her older cousin Sarah is the Queen's confidant, advisor, and secret lover. As Abigail gets closer to the Queen, she and Sarah engage in a back and forth fight for power, with their multiple attempts to get rid of the other and win over Queen Anne. One major reason love triangles feel so predictable and repetitive is because they tend to follow a similar structure of girl or guy in the middle, and then the two people fighting over said guy or girl are polar opposites of each other. You know, like the werewolf versus vampire love triangle, where one is cold to the touch and the other is warm.
You're really hot.
I am hotter than you.
Where one is pale and the other is tan, where Jacob is younger than Bella and even referred to as a child by Edward, who is significantly older than Bella, 90 years older. But more annoying is the extremely one-dimensional opposites, like the choice between the good guy or the bad guy, or the rich guy and the poor guy. In Titanic, that's Rose choosing between Jack, who is nothing but an angel, and Cal, who is comically evil.
Half the people on this ship are going to die.
Not the better half.
Which is fine, I love Titanic, and it's just that classic choice between the heart and the mind. The mind saying marry the rich guy and the heart saying run away with the dirt poor guy you met 2 days ago. You see it in The Notebook as well, although that is better compared to Romeo and Juliet, where the successful wealthy suitors, Count Paris or Lon Hammond, aren't necessarily bad people and do genuinely love their fiancés. It's just that their fiancés have found true love in someone else. Someone who just happens to be the complete opposite of successful and wealthy. These are classics. They work well because it pushes the audience in one direction. You root for the protagonist to go with their heart instead of mind, to go with the exciting option rather than the boring one. But there's only so many reiterations of these you can see before you get sick of it. The Favourite feels so refreshing because it doesn't play by this at all. It isn't interested in having Queen Anne's choice between these two be as simple as mind versus heart or good versus bad. These characters are complex and they have layers that are gradually revealed as the movie progresses, which makes the entire structure and flow of the movie so engaging. While the other love triangles talked about are predictable and push you in one direction, this one is unpredictable and pushes you in both directions. It might not seem that way at first. At the start of the movie, we're introduced to Abigail who, upon her arrival at the palace, is pushed out of the carriage and falls face first into what we learn is a mix of mud and feces. She's then tricked into meeting her cousin before she has the opportunity to clean herself. She's mistreated by the other workers by being tricked into scrubbing the floors with some chemical that burns her hand. Abigail is the clear, innocent underdog full of misfortune. Her cousin Sarah, on the other hand, appears to be the antagonist of the story, a woman in a position of power who is jealous and threatened by Abigail, a woman who is manipulative and hungry for power and influence. So when Abigail fights back and starts winning, you root for her, and you would think that the remainder of the story is Abigail winning, the queen chooses correctly, they live happily, the end. Instead, what it does in the second half is that the more that is revealed of Abigail, the more you start to realize she's nowhere near as innocent as you thought. She's just as manipulative, just as hungry for power, just as morally bankrupt, and she will go to extreme and cruel lengths in order to win. Then there's Sarah, where the more that is revealed of her, the more you understand that while her relationship with Anne might come across as harsh and a little cold, there's real love and care there. And with Queen Anne, the more you learn about her, the more she stops being just a comically crazy queen. You see the deep trauma and suffering she's gone through.
I lost some 17 children. Some were born as blood, some without breath, and some were with me for a very brief time.
And because of this, you slowly start to see that maybe the underdog you were rooting for shouldn't win. Maybe the person that should win was the one that you incorrectly thought of as the villain of the story.
Sometimes you look like a badger, and you can rely on me to tell you.
Why? Because I will not lie. That is love.
And by the time you come around to that conclusion, it's too late. Abigail is won. In her position of power, she neglects and ignores Anne. She's too busy having affairs and indulging in her newfound lifestyle. Then we get to the incredibly memorable and chilling ending. There are multiple ways you can end a love triangle. Some great ones end in tragedy, or ones where there's no real resolution and the triangle remains entangled in some way. Most go for an ending that attempts to satisfy and provide closure, which doesn't always happen if you look at how polarizing the end of The Hunger Games is, or how unpopular Jacob's imprint is. Here we have an ending where nobody truly wins. Anne only comes to the realization at the end when Abigail, unaware that Anne is awake and can hear what she's doing, sadistically crushes one of Anne's rabbits. The rabbit squealing in distress causes her to see Abigail's true nature, but at this point she's already gotten rid of Sarah. All the queen can do is use her position of authority to make Abigail share her misery. Shown in the last lingering shot of Abigail being forced to rub the queen's legs, in this humiliating act, Abigail is forced to come to terms with the fact that while she might have won in the battle to get rid of Sarah, she still won't have the life she desired. An end that might not give you the closure of a happy ending, but one that perfectly fits the story and is completely deserving of these complex characters we got to know. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Before you click away real quick, I just want to let you know that I started a Patreon where you can support the channel if you want to, and for just $2 you can get early access to my videos. There's one up there right now where I talk about why Goblet of Fire is close to being my favorite Potter book as well as my least favorite Potter movie. If you can support the channel by becoming a patron, I'd really appreciate it and it would really help me make more videos. If you can't, don't worry, that isn't a problem. All videos still go public for free just a little later. I hope you're all doing okay. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.